My name is Juliet Ashworth. I'm 31 years old, and until recently, I thought I was 6 weeks away from marrying the man I'd spend the rest of my life with, Billy Blackwell, 29. We'd been together for 2 years, engaged for 8 months, and for the most part, things had felt steady, predictable, and normal. But sometimes life doesn't fall apart in a sudden explosion. Sometimes it unravels quietly, one thread at a time, until the moment you finally notice everything you tried to ignore is sitting right in front of you, waiting to be acknowledged. For me, that moment came 3 nights ago when Billy walked into our living room holding a manila folder and wearing an oddly forced smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Baby, I need you to sign something real quick," he said lightly, as if he were asking me to initial a delivery receipt. I asked what it was. He replied, "Just a prenup, my friend. She's a paralegal, helped me draft it. Standard stuff." I should have sensed the shift then, but I was tired and distracted. I opened the folder and began reading. 1 page in, I frowned. 2 pages and my stomach dropped. By page 3, I actually laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because disbelief was the only reaction my brain could produce. It felt like reading a contract from someone who viewed me not as a partner, but as a financial resource. In summary, the prenup stated that all of my current assets, my house, my savings, my retirement funds would instantly become marital property upon marriage. Meanwhile, Billy's $80,000 in student loan debt would become my sole responsibility. If we divorced, he would receive half of my assets while I would remain legally tied to every dollar of his debt. I would be responsible for all household expenses, childcare costs, and anything else he considered financially burdensome, all so he could focus on his career. I looked up at him and asked, "You're joking, right?" He responded with complete seriousness. "It's just protecting both of us. You make more money, so it's only fair." He said it so casually, as if equity meant draining one person dry so the other could feel supported. When I pressed him asking how this possibly benefited me, he turned defensive, insisting his friend explained everything and that this was normal, especially when one partner earns more. I asked if he had actually read the document. He insisted he had. I flipped back to the debt section and asked why he wanted me to be legally responsible for his loans. He shrugged and said, "They're going to be our loans once we're married anyway." I explained that wasn't how marriage worked. He shot back that I was being selfish, as though refusing to take on $80,000 of someone else's debt meant I lacked commitment. That was the moment the emotional manipulation clicked into place. Over 2 years, we'd had minor disagreements, but nothing dramatic enough to raise alarms. Yet now faced with a clearly one-sided legal document, he was twisting the situation to make me feel guilty for not handing over my financial stability. "I'm not signing this," I told him. He demanded to know why. I answered plainly, "Because it's completely one-sided. I lose everything if this marriage doesn't work out." His response wasn't to address the imbalance. Instead, he accused me of planning for divorce. The pivot was so sharp it almost impressed me, but I felt the shift, my trust fracturing with every word he said. He snatched the prenup back and snapped, "Fine. Don't sign it. But there's no wedding without it." I stared at him, stunned that he would present me with a document designed to protect only him, and then threaten to cancel our wedding when I refused. "Really?" I asked. He doubled down. "Yes. No prenup, no wedding." I realized then that the man I loved was gone, or maybe he had never been the man I imagined. "Okay," I said. His face twisted in confusion. "What?" "No wedding." I repeated. His shock was immediate. He accused me of being ridiculous, insisting the prenup was just a piece of paper, yet he demanded my signature as if the entire marriage hinged on it. When I asked why he needed it if it was meaningless, he sputtered some excuse about it being normal and everyone having one, but even he didn't sound convinced. I grabbed my bag and my keys. He demanded to know where I was going. To my sister's place, I told him. "I need time to think." He shouted after me, saying we had a wedding to plan, but I paused in the doorway and told him calmly, "No. You have a wedding to cancel." Then I walked out. Over the next 3 days, he called 38 times and sent more than 100 messages. They shifted wildly in tone, begging me to come home, accusing me of destroying our future, berating me for being selfish. I ignored all of them. Instead, I called the wedding photographer and canceled our booking. I had paid the $3,000 deposit, and there was a $1,200 cancellation fee. I told them to bill the fee to Billy since he had chosen to tie the wedding to a predatory contract. The photographer hesitated but agreed. Later that night, Billy sent me a screenshot of the invoice with a furious message. "Are you serious right now?" I replied. "Yes. You made this bed. You can deal with it." When I put my phone down, the weight in my chest wasn't sadness, it was something colder. Something that told me the situation was far from over. I didn't know then just how unhinged everything was about to become, or how deeply Billy's entitlement would cut once he realized I wasn't going to be the woman who saved him from the financial mess he created. But the first warning sign was there pulsing quietly beneath the surface. And it was only the beginning. The following morning, I woke up to 6 more missed calls from Billy, along with a string of messages that alternated between pleading apologies and passive-aggressive jabs about me overreacting. I muted the conversation entirely. By then I had moved from shock to a strange, numbed clarity. Sometimes when your world tilts, you expect heartbreak to come crashing in. But instead, there is a quiet steadiness, the kind that only rises when you know somewhere deep inside that you made the right decision. But Billy didn't accept silence as an answer. On the second day after I left, I was sitting at my desk at work, trying to focus on a quarterly report, when my receptionist called my desk line in a tight whisper, "Juliet, your fiancé is here." My stomach tightened. Before I could respond, I saw him striding past her toward my office, acting like he belonged there. He pushed into my doorway with a dramatic sigh, ignoring every professional boundary. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded loud enough that the 2 analysts near the door turned to look. "We are supposed to be planning a wedding, Juliet." I stood, keeping my expression controlled. "Billy, you can't be here. We are not together right now." He scoffed loudly. "So that's what you're telling people now, that we're not together?" His voice kept rising, echoing off the office walls as employees peeked around cubicle corners. Before I could respond, security arrived, called by my receptionist, thank God, and escorted him out. Billy shouted over his shoulder that he wouldn't let me throw everything away, and his voice carried through the entire floor. Afterward, my boss pulled me aside privately. He didn't judge. He simply asked if I was safe. I gave him a short explanation. Engagement ended. Billy wasn't handling it well. My boss advised me to document everything. I nodded, knowing that advice wasn't overreaction, it was preparation. Something told me this wasn't ending soon. The next day, the chaos escalated. I received a call from Billy's mother, and the moment I heard her sharp inhale, I knew she wasn't calling to understand my side. "Juliet, what is this nonsense about canceling the wedding?" she snapped before I could even say hello. I calmly explained that Billy made the wedding conditional on me signing a prenup that gave him my assets and saddled me with his debt. Her response was a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "You are supposed to take care of your husband," she said, as if reciting a rule carved into stone. "That's what marriage is." "Marriage is a partnership," I replied, "not a financial trap." But she wasn't listening. She went on about the invitations already sent, the embarrassment I was causing, and how a real woman stands by her man right up until I reminded her that I was not the one who made the wedding conditional. She hung up on me mid-sentence. By day 4, the situation twisted again. Billy texted me a long message about forgiving me and wanting to move forward if I would just apologize and come home. I stared at the screen, stunned that he saw himself as the wronged one. My response was short. "I'm not apologizing for refusing to sign a one-sided prenup. The engagement is over." His reply was almost instant. "Fine. Then you owe me $15,000 for my half of the wedding deposits." I laughed. Truly laughed this time because the audacity was breathtaking. I typed back, "Check your bank records." I paid every deposit. He insisted that wasn't how deposits worked, and accused me of nickel and diming him after 2 years together. I gave him the exact numbers: venue, catering, flowers, DJ, photographer, all of them paid from my account. After that, he went silent, which was almost a relief. But the relief didn't last. The next morning, the wedding venue called me. The coordinator sounded tentative, unsure how to phrase the question. "Juliet, Billy contacted us. He told us you had a breakdown and canceled the wedding, but he wants to keep the date with a different bride." I closed my eyes, processing the absurdity. The coordinator asked if I wanted to transfer the contract to his name. I said yes, immediately. If he wanted the wedding so badly, he could shoulder the cost. The deposit was non-refundable. I couldn't get that money back, but he could deal with the remaining balance. I told her to send everything to him. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with Billy's furious call. "How could you do that? They want $12,000 by next week. How am I supposed to pay that? That's not my problem, I said. You told them you wanted to keep the date. You can't just leave me with all this debt, he snapped. The irony, I replied quietly, is that this is exactly what you tried to do to me. His tone shifted instantly defensive and cold. That's different. Explain how, I said. He didn't have an answer, only a snarl of frustration before hanging up. That afternoon, the situation took an even stranger turn. I had mentioned earlier that his paralegal friend helped him draft the prenup. Well, my lawyer, whom I hired that morning, looked into it. Billy's friend wasn't a paralegal. She wasn't even in the legal field. She was a life coach who had taken one online legal course. The prenup had multiple clauses that were outright illegal and would never hold up in court. My lawyer sent Billy a formal letter outlining why the document was invalid, unenforceable, and bordering on fraud. He also sent a cease and desist for the harassment, the office visit, the constant calls, the inappropriate behavior. At 6 p.m., Billy sent me a text. I can't believe you got a lawyer. This is so dramatic. I responded, you brought me a fake prenup. I brought a real lawyer. That seems proportional. His only reply was, we could have worked this out like adults. I said, adults don't use fake legal documents to manipulate their partners. He had nothing else to say. Despite everything, I didn't feel guilt. Billy wasn't showing me someone who was hurt or confused. He was showing me someone who had a plan, who felt entitled to my entire life, and who was growing angrier each time I refused to step back into the role he expected me to play. The wedding should have been 6 weeks away. Instead, I was dealing with a man unraveling faster than I could track a mother-in-law who blamed me for everything, and the slow, unnerving realization that I hadn't dodged a breakup, I had escaped a disaster. And even then, I had no idea the worst part was still coming. The days that followed felt strangely unreal, as if I were watching my own life play out from a careful distance. I knew Billy wasn't handling the breakup well, but I underestimated just how determined he was to rewrite the story in his favor. His persistence wasn't fueled by heartbreak. It was fueled by entitlement, the kind that twists reason until the person behaving irrationally convinces themselves that they're the victim. 3 days after my lawyer sent the cease and desist letter, I received a call from my mother. She sounded unsettled. Juliet, Billy just called your aunt, your cousin, and even your father. He's telling everyone that you abandoned him during wedding planning and left him at the altar. I closed my eyes. He wasn't just spiraling. He was weaponizing the narrative. I told her the truth, sent her a photo of the prenup, and waited. 10 minutes later, she called back, her voice sharper this time. What in the world was he thinking, Juliet? Thank God you walked away. Meanwhile, Billy's family escalated the drama in their own way. His father called, threatening to sue me for emotional damages, as if breaking off an engagement were grounds for litigation. My lawyer dismissed it immediately, assuring me the threats were empty. His exact words were, they'd be laughed out of a courtroom. But hearing the threats still shook me, especially knowing Billy's parents seemed fully aligned with his delusional sense of being wronged. It told me that the entitlement didn't begin with him, it came from somewhere. The absurdity continued online. Billy's sister posted vague, dramatic rants on social media about toxic women who bail when things get real. I didn't respond, but some of my friends did. They asked what happened, so I explained simply. He brought me a prenup that would give him my assets and make me responsible for his debt. When I refused, he canceled the wedding. I walked away. Most people understood instantly. A few even told me I'd dodged something catastrophic. But the real turning point came when my lawyer called me one afternoon. Juliet, he said, sounding almost amused. I dug into that paralegal friend who supposedly drafted the prenup. He paused for effect. She's not a paralegal. She's a life coach. I nearly dropped my phone. A life coach. Yes, he continued. A life coach with no legal credentials. She took one online course on alternative dispute resolution. That's it. And she prepared a prenup with multiple clauses that are illegal in this state, particularly the part about assigning someone else's debt. No judge would uphold any of it. I sat on my couch, absorbing the information. The prenup had been written so poorly, so obviously flawed, that it could never have been enforceable. And yet Billy presented it with complete confidence, real enough that he believed he could pressure me into signing it. My lawyer's next words shattered the last remaining illusions I had about Billy's intentions. There's a pattern here, Juliet. The clauses weren't random. This wasn't an innocent mistake. Someone told him how to structure this to benefit himself. That moment lingered with me. Who would advise him like that? It didn't take long for the answer to surface. Later that evening, my friend Sarah, who knew people in Billy's social circle, called me. She sounded hesitant, as though weighing the consequences of sharing what she knew. Juliet, I talked to someone who used to hang around Billy's ex-girlfriend. You're not going to like this. I felt my pulse quicken. Just tell me. The life coach. She's close friends with Billy's ex. Like, very close. And apparently Billy has been seeing her for months, not romantically, she added quickly, but for financial planning sessions. He's been paying her $200 an hour. For what I asked already, knowing the answer. To strategize his financial future. The prenup was the result of those meetings. There are screenshots, Juliet messages from Billy talking about securing his financial future and making sure his partner handles the debt. He wasn't thinking about protecting himself. He was thinking about using you. The world around me seemed to slow. This wasn't impulsive. He had planned this, sat in meetings, discussed my finances with strangers, plotted out how to offload his debt onto me while claiming half of what I'd built long before he existed in my life. I felt sick. Not heartbroken betrayal had replaced any lingering affection, but deeply, viscerally humiliated that I ever believed he saw me as an equal partner. My lawyer wasted no time. Upon receiving the screenshots from my friend, he updated the cease and desist letter to include evidence of premeditated financial manipulation. The tone of the letter shifted. It was no longer a polite warning, it was a formal declaration that Billy's actions bordered on fraudulent coercion. The next day, everything escalated further. Around noon, my phone notified me that someone was at my apartment door. I opened the app connected to my security camera and saw Billy standing there, pacing, with the restless energy of someone who refused to accept reality. He slammed his hand on the door. Juliet, let me in. We need to talk. I pressed the intercom button. No, leave. You can't keep avoiding me, he shouted. I'm not avoiding you. I'm telling you no. Juliet, I'm not leaving until you open the door. That was enough. I called the non-emergency police line and explained that my ex-fiancé, who had been repeatedly warned not to contact me, was refusing to leave my property. When the officer arrived, Billy tried to explain that I was being unreasonable, that we were engaged, that he needed closure. The officer wasn't moved. He told Billy plainly that he needed to leave immediately or be arrested for trespassing. Billy's face shifted through a range of emotions: rage, disbelief, desperation, before he finally left. An hour later, he sent me a text that read, "Calling the cops on me, real mature." I didn't respond. The following morning, I woke to an email from his mother with the subject line, "You will regret this." The message was 3 paragraphs of insults, accusations, and threats about how I was ruining her son's life. I forwarded the email to my lawyer without comment. His reply was simple: document everything. This family is unhinged. At that point, the wedding would have been 4 weeks away. Instead of floral arrangements and fittings, I was dealing with harassment, false narratives, and a family who treated me as though I had committed a crime. But underneath all of it, a quiet strength was forming. I had walked away before I was legally tied to someone who never saw me as a partner, only as a solution to his problems. Billy was unraveling his plans, collapsing around him. But he wasn't finished yet, and I had no idea how bizarre things were about to become. Over the next week, the situation spiraled further than I thought possible. Billy's sense of entitlement seemed to deepen each time he realized I wouldn't give him what he wanted: my money, my agreement, or my silence. Instead of stepping back and accepting the breakup, he doubled down, constructing a narrative where he was the abandoned victim of an unstable fiancé. And he spread that story with stunning commitment. The first sign of the escalation came through whispers from mutual acquaintances. A friend texted me, "Juliet, why is Billy telling people you cracked under wedding pressure?" Another said he claimed I had run away because I couldn't handle responsibility. It was surreal. He wasn't just denying what actually happened. He was rewriting the script entirely, painting himself as a man blindsided by my supposed emotional meltdown. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't argue online. I didn't post anything. Let him talk. The truth had a way of surfacing on its own. But the quietness on my end seemed to provoke him more, as if my refusal to play into his theatrics was a personal insult. Then things grew louder. The wedding vendors began calling me in a cascade of confusion. The caterer reached out asking whether the event was still happening. I told them no and asked them to cancel everything. The deposit was non-refundable, which I accepted. Billy called screaming 5 minutes later, furious that I had canceled without discussing it, when I calmly reminded him that there was no wedding. He snapped back that I had robbed him of the opportunity to use the date for something else, though he couldn't specify what. His fallback strategy was suddenly compromise. He proposed scaling the wedding down, removing the prenup, pretending none of it had happened. He talked about a small ceremony, just close family, something intimate and meaningful. But his tone wasn't remorseful or self-reflective. It was transactional, like someone adjusting the terms of a negotiation when the first version failed. "Juliet," he said over the phone, sounding exhausted. "I'm willing to compromise. No prenup. Let's just do a simple wedding." "There's nothing to compromise," I told him. "You didn't make a mistake, Billy. You planned this. You spent months meeting with someone to strategize how to take my assets and get rid of your debt." He fell silent, and I could practically hear the calculations happening in his head. When he didn't respond, I pushed further. "How much did you save for the honeymoon, Billy?" "That's not relevant," he muttered. "Try me." A long pause. "About $2,000. So," I said slowly, "I paid $13,000 in wedding deposits and you saved $2,000 for an $8,000 honeymoon you expected me to cover the difference for. And on top of that, you wanted me to take on your $80,000 in debt." When he didn't speak, I added, "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is who you are." He hung up. For a brief moment, it felt like everything might calm down. The silence from him lasted almost 24 hours. But that calm was deceptive. Because what came next pushed the entire situation into something so bizarre and surreal that even now, thinking back on it, feels like remembering a fever dream. Sarah, the friend who had connections to Billy's old social group, contacted me again. She told me she had received more screenshots, phone conversations between Billy the life coach and a group chat that included Billy's ex-girlfriend. The messages were full of alarming statements. Billy bragged about setting up a secure future, talked about locking down assets, and even described the prenup as essential for making sure I don't drown in debt. In one message, his ex wrote, "She makes good money. Don't let her slip away without protecting yourself." In another, the life coach reassured him that prenups were empowering tools that allowed men to take ownership of their financial lives. It wasn't just manipulation. It was a coordinated plan developed over months to solidify his financial advantage at my expense. My lawyer added these screenshots to the file and adjusted his tone in the next letter to Billy's legal representative, no longer a warning, but a record of documented, premeditated intent. The next day, things escalated again. I was home late that evening when my phone buzzed with a notification from my security camera. Billy was at my door. He knocked loudly at first, then pounded. When I didn't answer, he began pacing, muttering angrily to himself, running his hands through his hair like someone spiraling. I pressed the intercom and told him to leave. He refused. "I'm not going anywhere until you talk to me," he insisted, his voice rising. I didn't argue. I called the police, told them my ex-fiancé, who I had a cease and desist order against, was refusing to leave my property. An officer arrived within minutes. Billy tried to justify being there, talking about unfinished business and miscommunication, but the officer cut him off. "Sir, she told you to leave. You need to go." When he protested again, the officer's tone hardened. "Leave now or be arrested for trespassing." That finally made him retreat, though not without throwing one last glare at the camera. The next morning, another email arrived from his mother, this time filled with insults, threats, and declarations that I would regret turning my back on the best man I'd ever find. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who added it to the growing file. By then, the wedding was 3 weeks away. I expected silence. Instead, the chaos reached its peak in a way no one could have predicted. On the morning the wedding should have taken place, I turned off my phone and went to my sister's house to spend the day quietly. When I turned it back on that evening, I found 3 voicemails from Billy, each more frantic than the last. The first voicemail was shaky, confused. "I can't believe you're really not showing up. Everyone's asking where you are." The second had more panic. "My mom paid the venue balance last minute, Juliet. She invited everyone anyway. This is humiliating." The final message was filled with rage. "I hope you're happy. You ruined what should have been the best day of my life." I called Sarah, who happened to know someone on the guest list. What she told me didn't feel real. Billy's mother had indeed paid the remaining venue balance the night before. They set up everything. Flowers, chairs, catering, decorations, as if the wedding were going forward. Then, in front of 150 guests, Billy walked up the aisle alone. There was no bride, no vows, nothing resembling a ceremony. But he stood there anyway and gave a speech about strong men being abandoned by weak women, about toxic partners who can't handle real commitment, and about how he deserved better. Afterward, they turned the reception into what one guest described as a bizarre celebration of his broken engagement, complete with dinner dancing and Billy's mother insisting to everyone that I had ruined everything. It cost them nearly $18,000, and they did it without a bride. At first, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but as I sat there listening to the voicemails again, the humiliation, the outrage, the sadness, everything I might have felt gave way to something more grounded, relief. Not only had I escaped something destructive, I had escaped something unhinged. Billy's unraveling wasn't my responsibility, and the wedding I had once imagined was gone, but thankfully so was the man I almost married. What I didn't know yet was that the fallout was far from over. In the days following the surreal wedding with no bride spectacle, a strange quiet settled over my life. It wasn't peace at first, more like the uneasy stillness after a storm, when everything feels suspended between shock and recovery. The story of Billy's ceremony spread quickly among people who had been invited. Some reached out asking if I was safe, others apologized for attending. A few sent me stunned, almost disbelieving accounts of how bizarre the entire event had been. Each message confirmed what I already knew. The man I had almost married was not simply entitled or manipulative, he was unstable in ways I never imagined. But while he played out his theatrics, real consequences began catching up with him. A week after the non-wedding, the venue contacted me again, not for money, but to inform me they were pursuing legal action against Billy. He had never paid the remaining balance and had made contradictory claims about who was responsible. Because the contract had been transferred into his name, the venue's lawyers were suing him for the outstanding $12,000 plus administrative fees. The coordinator made it clear Billy had insisted on keeping the date, insisted on paying later, and insisted on hosting an event, however dysfunctional it turned out. There was no ambiguity. Later that evening, Billy called me from an unfamiliar number. His voice was trembling with anger. "They're suing me, Juliet. You have to help me. You knew I couldn't pay for this." I kept my voice calm. "Billy, you told the venue you wanted to keep the date. You accepted the contract. You transferred it to me knowing I couldn't afford it," he shot back. "You asked for it," I reminded him. "You said you needed the date. You made the wedding conditional on a prenup you designed to trap me financially. These are the consequences of decisions you made." "You're vindictive," he snapped. "You're punishing me for one mistake." "It wasn't one mistake," I replied. "It was months of planning with a life coach and your ex-girlfriend to figure out how to use me. It was a fraudulent prenup. It was harassing me at work. It was showing up at my apartment after being told not to. None of this was one moment of bad judgment. This is a pattern." There was a long, tense silence on his end. Then he asked, almost broken, "I loved you. Doesn't that matter?" I answered honestly. "People who love you don't try to financially trap you." He hung up without another word. After that, I blocked the number. It felt like closing a chapter. Not the end of the story yet, but the irreversible turning point. Word of the lawsuit spread quickly through his family, and soon their anger turned toward mine. Billy's parents sent my parents a bill, claiming they had contributed to wedding preparations and demanded reimbursement. My parents answered by forwarding receipts showing they hadn't contributed a single cent yet, and even if they had, those contributions would have been voluntary. When Billy's father followed up with a threatening email about financial obligations, my lawyer responded with a cease and desist so firmly worded it ended all communication overnight. Their fury evaporated once they realized the legal consequences might shift in their direction. Meanwhile, Billy's sister continued her campaign of vague social media posts about weak women and cowards who disappear when life gets tough. My friend sent me screenshots for entertainment. In one post she wrote, "Some people show their true colors when tested. Glad the trash took itself out." One of my friends, the blunt, unapologetic type, commented under it, "You talking about your brother trying to scam his fiancé with a fake prenup?" She deleted the post within minutes. But the part that surprised me most was the implosion between Billy, his ex-girlfriend, and the so-called life coach who engineered the prenup. Word circulated through their circle that Billy had accused them of giving him bad advice. The life coach demanded Billy pay her remaining sessions. Billy accused her of incompetence. His ex-girlfriend backed away from the situation entirely once she realized he had made her involvement public. The group chat that once planned his financial takeover of my life was suddenly filled with blame instead of strategy. Karma rarely arrives quickly, but when it does, it's unmistakable. As for me, The dust began to settle. I moved back into my home, changed the locks, updated my security system, and began separating my emotional reality from the chaos I had just survived. I enrolled in a financial planning course, not because I feared being manipulated again, but because I wanted to understand deeply and clearly how to protect myself in the future. Knowledge felt like armor. For the first time in weeks, my life began to feel like my own again. I slept better. I worked without fear of Billy barging in. I stopped bracing myself every time my phone buzzed. My world, which had contracted under the weight of his manipulation, started expanding back to its normal shape. A few weeks after the non-wedding, my brother asked if I felt ready to date again. I told him no. And to my own surprise, the answer felt confident, not fearful. I didn't want someone new. I wanted time. Time to understand how I ended up in a relationship where love had camouflaged exploitation. Time to rebuild trust in myself, not in someone else. Time to appreciate the escape I had made. Because that's what it was, an escape. I didn't lose a partner. I lost a man who never saw me as one. And as strange as it sounds, I felt grateful. Grateful that everything unraveled before vows were exchanged, before legal papers were signed, before his debt became mine and my home became ours, in a way that would have left me fighting to reclaim what I built. Grateful that the worst thing he could do in the end was hold a wedding without a bride and embarrass himself publicly. Grateful that when the smoke cleared, I was standing on a foundation he couldn't touch. Looking back, I realized something I couldn't see in the moment. Sometimes the universe doesn't save you gently. Sometimes it rips the truth open so forcefully that you're left with no choice but to walk away. And even though the road was messy, humiliating at times, and unbelievably dramatic, it led me exactly where I needed to be. The money I lost was painful. The time I invested was disappointing. But the clarity I gained about him, about myself, about what I deserve, was priceless. If I had married Billy, I would have spent years disentangling myself from a man who saw me as a financial plan instead of a partner. Instead, I spent a single afternoon eating takeout with my sister and the next morning reclaiming my life. When people tell me I was strong for leaving, I correct them. I wasn't strong. In the moment, I was terrified. But strength doesn't always feel like power. Sometimes it feels like shaking hands, a cracked voice, or walking away from someone who is begging you to stay, even when part of you wants to believe them. Strength is